All right, so I think we have everyone. So is it okay if we get started?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hanson.
Okay. Good evening. The Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, February 9th, 2022 is now called to order. Director Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Raspy?
Here.
Commissioner Janoff?
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett?
Here.
And Chair Hanson.
Here. And so then we have Commissioners Tavana and Thomas that are absent. Before continuing, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our staff who will address the rules of decorum and civility for our town public meetings.
The public is welcome to participate in the meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meeting is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the agenda. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at board, commission, or committee meetings. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at board, commission, or committee meetings. All public comments at the board, commission, or committee meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the chair may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the commissioners exiting the chamber or meeting room. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the commissioners would return to the chamber or meeting room and the chair would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a board, commission, or committee meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code, Section 403.
Okay, thank you for that. And now we will move on. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of this Planning Commission. That public participation can occur through first written comments, which are about agenda items submitted to staff prior to a meeting, are always welcome and helpful. And then during our meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. The first is during verbal communications, where any individual may speak on a topic that is not on the agenda. And during the hearing of a specific agenda item, any member of the public may speak about that item that is on the agenda. When called to speak, we ask you to please state your name and address for the record. However, alternatively, you may choose to speak anonymously. It is requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes regardless. And so now we will move on to verbal communications. And this is the portion of the agenda in which members of the public are invited to address the commission on any issue that is not on the agenda. Do we have any speakers for verbal communications?
Thank you, Chair. So I see one hand raised. Again, this is for items that are not on the agenda. We'll allow the telephone number, last four digits, 1501, to talk. Hello, you're unmuted.
Hello?
Yes, are you?
I lowered my
talking
hand.
on
I'm
something?
sorry. No, I'm
No
sorry.
problem.
I'm waiting to speak on an agenda item.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other hands for verbal communications?
Chair Hansen, I don't see any other hands for items not on the agenda.
Okay, then we will move on. And the next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. We have one item to be acted upon with a single motion, and that is approval of the draft minutes of the January 26th Planning Commission meeting. Does any commission member or member of the public wish to pull the item from the consent calendar for discussion during the meeting? I don't see any hands raised from the commission. And Director Paulson, is there anyone from the public that not like? Okay.
There is not.
Okay. So seeing none, may I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Clark.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you for that. And may I have a second? Commissioner Ratsby.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you for that. Are there any comments or changes to the minutes before I call the question? I don't see any. So I will take a roll call vote, and I will start with Commissioner Ratsby.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously. And we can move on to the public portions of the public hearing portion of the meeting. And we will be going to agenda item 2, which is requesting approval for the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence to exceed the floor area ratio standards with a reduced front and side yard setbacks on non-conforming property zoned R-1D. This is located at 118 Olive Street, APN 410-15022. Architecture and site application S-21-013. Property owners Thomas and Meredith Reichert. Applicant J. Plett Architect. And our project planner is Sean Mellon. This agenda item is a continuation from our January 12th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. However, I will still ask if there are any disclosures that any commissioners need to make from the time that we had our last meeting. And are there any commissioners that visited the site since the last meeting? Okay, all right. And then we have no disclosures. So we can go on and move on to the staff report. Mr. Mullen, will you be giving a staff report?
Good evening,
Ms.
Chair.
Armour.
Yeah,
Oh, Ms. Armour, yeah, because
I will be making.
I don't see him in the thing. So,
Yeah, I will be making the presentation on behalf of Mr. Mullen this evening. So good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. The item before you, as was just stated, is a continuation of your discussion on January 12th. At that meeting, the Planning Commission considered the application and directed the applicant to continue neighbor outreach efforts and contact neighbors that expressed concerns and provide a three-dimensional rendering of the proposed residence. In addition to the information that was provided in response to these two items as exhibits 14 and 15 for your staff report, a desk item was also provided today with revised three-dimensional rendering with dimensions, additional public comments, and the applicant's response to public comments. This concludes staff's presentation, but we would be happy to answer any questions.
okay, do any commissioners have questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Ratsby.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick clarification. Nothing substantively has changed in the plans since we last discussed it. Is that correct?
That's correct. It really was just doing the additional outreach and providing the additional information rendering that was requested.
Thank you so much.
Do any other commissioners have questions for staff? I had one quick question about the desk item, and that was, we had a couple comments that came in, and I was curious as to whether or not those commenters were part of the group that we asked the applicant to address before that hadn't spoken previously on the item.
I've not gone back and compared the names, but I think we can ask that of the applicant to let us know whether that is somebody that those are people that they had previously reached out to.
Okay, very good, thank you. If no other commissioners have questions, then I will go ahead and move on to the applicant. And the applicant is able to address the commission for up to 5 minutes.
So Mr. Plett, you can unmute yourself and begin your presentation. We can't hear you if you're speaking, Mr. Plett. You are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Now you're muted. You want to try to unmute yourself again? There you go. Still not hearing audio.
Okay,
Mr.
how
Slide,
about,
if you want to?
can you hear me now?
Okay, now you're. Yes.
Okay, good evening, Commissioner members. Sorry about that. Yeah, per the instruction that we received, we submitted a three-dimensional diagram of the structure, and we submitted a desk item that depicts the various dimensions from property line that shows that this is not a flat facade of any kind that might have been conveyed through just a flat elevation. There's a lot of depth and back and forth on the facade of this house. The change, though, that you spoke of, the balcony over the garage, that is shown removed in the depiction, the three-dimensional depiction that you have as a desk item. So that shows a sloping shed roof over the garage in lieu of the balcony that was there. We also did conduct further outreach and to the neighbors, and they were able to walk around the property, invited onto the property. You could view the story poles close up and have a discussion with the owners of the property. And I'll turn that over to Thomas Reichert now to talk about the one specific neighbor.
Yes, I think the question was specific around the people who signed the current letter. I believe that there was only one person that signed it that did not show up, and that was 108 Olive. I had not talked to that person previously or to this point at all. Everyone else who signed it, I believe, participated in the previous one, as well as showed up to the second open house to discuss the project.
Okay, is that, are you finished with your comments?
Yes, if you have questions, we're open for questions.
Of course, and I will ask if the commission has any questions for the applicant. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. That was a very brief presentation, but I'm curious to know from the property owner whether you included in your application or in the item we have summary of the outreach. Can you summarize the summary and let us know whether, in your opinion, you were able to assuage neighbors' concerns You made a change to the plans by removing the balcony. Can you just give us a quick update on whether you found this to be an action that moves your project along in the direction you had hoped?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say the overall takeaway was it was nice to meet the new neighbors, or us as the new neighbors to meet everyone. So I think that was really a positive point of the participation. Everyone who came in that second session was someone who I had not met since moving in. Because it was during COVID, we hadn't met any of those neighbors, and they had not also reached out to us as the new neighbors. So it was nice to have this avenue to discuss that. Another point outside of that, more to your question, was I think there was some clarity brought, because not everyone is familiar with reading plans. So when you see it just on 2D paper, one of the specifics was people thought we were going for more build, higher build, more side build, more front build. And when they came and they looked and could see it and we could discuss it in person, the fact that we weren't going for the maximum height, the fact that we weren't going for full length, 2-story all the way across, those were points that we came to a little bit of clarity on. I think some of the issues with parking and the fact that we're asking for exemptions, were points that no one changed their opinions on, but that we became very clear on the sticking points that we didn't necessarily agree with.
Thank you.
So that answers your question, Commissioner Jana. Okay, do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, continuing on that vein, I tried to summarize your summary. And is it correct that you had 4 neighbors who were unconditionally in favor of the application and 1 neutral?
That's correct. There's only 2 addresses within the 5+2+2 that are opposed. It's the 2 neighbors, I believe, to the west, 120 and 122, which is the vacant lot. All of the other neighbors were either neutral or supporting. That's correct.
Okay. And as to those who did not support, their concerns were primarily the variances and blocking views?
That's correct. And I didn't touch on the point that there was positive feedback on the fact that we were switching from the balcony to the roof. Again, didn't dissuade the sticking points, but that was a point of common ground.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions.
I had just a clarifying question. In the desk item today, there was a couple of letters, and the first one, the person basically said that I wanted to make sure that you knew that I was not in support of the project, and so I was didn't have time to go and check to where it was relative to the last hearing. That person had they previously voiced their disapproval of the project?
Correct. So I think you're talking about the applicant or the neighbor at 110 Olive, Jim.
Well, they block out the address. That was part of the problem. So.
Yeah. So Jim signed both letters, and each time after he signed the letter, I asked him what his concern was, and both times he said that it was a combination of parking and the contractor selection. And both times he said, I don't want to, pretend to know why he signed the letter. But to me, both times he said he's fine with it as long as we are good with this parking situation and not using that contractor that worked on the project next door to him.
Okay, good. Okay, I think that cleared it up. I felt like you did a very thorough job of documenting all the interactions you had and reaching out to the people, but I wanted to make sure that there weren't people coming out of the woodwork that we didn't know about before.
No,
so
that's one person who did not continue signing the letter, and the person who owns 116 Olive refrained from re-signing the newsletter.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. I think that answers my question. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? We will have another chance after public comments if we have any. So we will go ahead and move on to public comments. And this would be a time for any member of the public to speak about this item on the agenda. Do we have anyone that would like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Anyone that wishes to speak on this item from the public, please raise your hand. And so we will have the telephone number ending in 1501 speak first.
Good evening, Planning Commission. This is Shelley Baker, owner of 120 Olive Street here again. As a reminder,
We just lost you.
good evening, Planning Commission. Hello?
We can hear you now.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. Shelley Baker, owner of 120 Olive Street here again. As a reminder, our property is directly next door on the west side of the proposed home to the left and understandably the most affected. As noted at the last meeting, our expansive mountain view will be completely blocked and we will be looking out of our living, kitchen, dining, and master bedroom windows at tall walls. These same areas will lose their incredible natural lighting, as will our entire backyard, as confirmed in the shadow study provided. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about this. But it gets even worse. The proposed exception of reducing the side setback from 5 feet to 3 feet is preposterous, especially when considering the stitch peering process taking place just that much closer to our 80-year-old constructed home on a sloped lot with sump pumps underneath. Given the research we've done, the stitch peering process is going to shake the heck out of our home no matter what, but even more so if this reduced side setback exception is granted. Additionally, the elevation of the rear exterior walkout decking requires clarity, as it appears that the submitted architectural renderings don't clearly depict the height. If I am guessing accurately, not only will our kitchen, dining, and backyard lack natural lighting, they will lack cherished privacy as well. We were not able to walk the property the evening that we visited. It was 5:30 Friday night. It was very cold, and it became dark, and we had some interruptions as well that did prevent us from even going down the side yard into the backyard at all. Didn't even come across the radar. If this proposed plan is approved as is, it will be the beginning of the end for Olive Street as we know it. The narrowest street with the tiniest lots in Los Gatos. Every cottage sale hereafter will be viewed as a teardown, land value, and as they turn over, more overbuilt homes with exceptions galore will prevail, thus beginning the domino effect. In hindsight, I believe the town and planning commissioners will regret their hastiness in needlessly granting these types of exceptions to the rules that were set in place for valid reasons. But it will be too late, and those who live and have loved their homes will have been the ones who have suffered. As with most, our homes are our livelihood. Planning commissioners, we ask that you put yourselves in our shoes, in our homes, and try to feel the situation as it really is. Imagine if this was happening in your world, on your street, or even next door to your home. The important decisions you make here regarding 118 Olive Street will set a new precedent and expectations for the future owners and builders on Olive Street. That's what I have to say this evening. I could say more, but thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions for Ms. Baker. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item?
Yes, the next speaker will be Bonnie. Bonnie, you can unmute yourself and then you can speak.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I hope you guys can hear me. So I agree with a good deal of what Shelley said. A couple of areas of clarification. The gentleman that owns the property at 108 is a surgeon and he's often on call. So he's unfortunately unable to attend these calls, but he did sign both letters. And I just want to make sure that it's not for lack of interest in the topic that he's not on the call, to make sure you guys know that. As for what Shelley said, I did attend the outreach meeting. We were not invited to walk the property, as she said. Initially, it was very nice to meet the two owners of the property. Meredith and Thomas. But shortly after we convened there, yes, it was 5:30. Yes, it started to get dark. Yes, it became cold. But we also were interrupted by a neighbor that intervened and interrupted the conversation and didn't allow a productive conversation to proceed, unfortunately. So that neighbor didn't do any good service to the ensuing possibly productive communication that could have happened that evening. And so as a result, I have to admit, it really was a bit of a waste of time. But on the other hand, neither was that neighbor told to please be quiet and take his viewpoint someplace else. So I left there feeling that it was a decent attempt, but I got nothing really out of the meeting. Again, we weren't asked to walk the property. When I looked at the meeting, the renderings that I saw originally, in my view, and I'm not an architect, but it looks like a tear down to me. It does not look like an addition. It does not look like any kind of addition being addressed there. They're going to just dismantle the entire property. And basically, when I was asking questions about the garage and the property itself, the feeling I got when I walked away that evening was that they pretty much said, we know what we want. And I get that, they know what they want and they asked for what they wanted and nobody told them they couldn't do it. So there was no pushback. They asked for what they want and it was a bunch of check marks on a bunch of boxes and check, 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 and off they went. So that's why they proceeded with the renderings that you guys are all seeing today. They asked for everything and nobody said no. So I agree with what Shelley has said. I think and by the way, on the prior call, my recollection was that one of the commissioners, I don't recall who, said it was a transition. This area was in transition. This area, if you ask some of the local owners, it's not a transition, and that I think many of us own our property for a long time and we intend to stay. I, for one, have owned my property for 18 years. And I bought it as a single woman, single person, and I intend to stay. Thank you very much. I see your hand up, so it must mean I'm out of time.
Thank you so much for your comments. I'd like to ask if any commissioners have questions for Ms. Horwitz. I don't. Oh, Vice Chair Barnett does.
Yes, as I understand, there were 2 opportunities to meet with the owners. And I was wondering if you attended both of those or just the one where it got dark and cold and you weren't asked to view the property.
Well, it was a second meeting and I had some personal medical thing to attend to on the prior call. So I wasn't able to attend the first meeting, but I attended the second one when I felt better. If you need to know that, that's the case and that's the truth.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
The fact that it's convenient for the neighbor is not necessarily convenient for everybody else. So.
Okay, we thank you for your comments and I think you answered Commissioner or Vice Chair Barnett's question. So staff, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item? I see a couple of hands.
Yes. Yeah, the next speaker will be Keith. And Keith apparently is not using the appropriate version of Zoom. I'm going to vote Keith to panelist quickly.
Can you hear me now? And
I can hear you, yes.
okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. When my wife and I own 120 Olive Street, who is Shelley Baker, who spoke earlier, when we were looking at buying Olive Street, we spent a lot of time sort of researching the neighborhood, looking into the neighborhood, seeing what was going on and trying to imagine what changes we could expect going forward in the future. It was mostly made up of a lot of smaller homes, some remodels. Our house had been remodeled prior to us purchasing it. And this is a really narrow street, very quaint. And we thought, this would be great for us for now. And the change we could see would be some amount of turnover, some amount of remodel. We went so far looking into it as to, review the building codes and go down to the building department and ask them you know, what we're changing, what could we expect, what rules would be followed, and we were fairly much assured that the town was a stickler for the rules, making sure that everybody followed them. And yet here we are, you know, 20 years later, or not quite. And it's not just the neighborhood changing, it's actually the house right next door, which we expected. But we didn't expect that it wouldn't follow all of the rules, and specifically the front and side setbacks are the ones that concern us most, as those have the greatest impact on our property specifically, but also the floor area ratio being exceeded, as we expected it to be. Sort of smaller homes would remain the norm. So the rules as they were and the rules as they still are just not being followed doesn't seem to be reasonable to me. And I ask you why that's not the case. I mean, why not follow the rules? I don't fault the new owners who seem to be very nice, and the architect has done a great job presenting a nice home. But it isn't that much different to just follow rules and all this problem would go away. So anyway, that's my concern. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you for your comments. Do any commissioners have questions for Mr. White? I don't see any hands raised, so thank you for your comments. And is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item?
Yes, there is. Oh, there was. There we are again. Next speaker will be Darren.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Okay. First thing's just quick clarification. Both meetings, I think, were at the same time at 5:30. So the getting dark and cold was the same thing. The other thing is we weren't invited to walk around the house or anything of the sort. And thirdly, we weren't privy to any additional information as we had assumed was part of the direction from the Planning Commission to provide additional renderings. Nothing was offered, no full-size plans, no renderings, no sketches, no nothing. So that's my first thing. Then I'll read as quickly as I can here that Olive Street's a charming neighborhood with older, smaller homes on a very narrow street. Unfortunately, several of the characteristics that made this such a nice neighborhood are also the characteristics that become, excuse me, obstacles. Parking is abysmal. Garages are often not used as intended, and driveways are rarely used for more than one car. So ultimately, the overflow turns into a game of musical chairs for the permitted parking on Olive Street. The losers end up on San Benito Avenue, and the residents of San Benito that are not allowed to park on Olive Street have no place to park. This is especially difficult for those of us that have family members that are aged, handicapped, or have health issues. Therefore, every effort should be made to lessen the impact of the situation by enforcing a full-length driveway that is not including the public right-of-way and installing the car lift that is on the plans. The homes are very close together, and the applicant had a choice to remodel a cute home that allows setbacks that are consistent with that home, and therefore the neighborhood, or to demolish the home and build under an entirely different direction. The applicant has chosen the latter, yet proposes building a house that does not follow either of those criteria and even requests several unnecessary variances. There are no inherent, compelling, or logical reasons why this needs to be. Incidentally, there has not been another home on Olive Street that was demolished and then built. Very slight modifications to the plans bring the home back in line with the rules and lessens the concerns many neighbors have without significantly changing the design or integrity. Simply moving the house 5 feet back on the property line and 2 feet to the east for the garage will alleviate neighborhood concerns as well as solve the problematic substandard length driveway. As for size of the house, a non-conforming lot is given the benefit of a higher floor area ratio than a conforming lot to compensate for its size. This home takes not only advantage of that, but it exceeds it by 308 square feet or 23%. The building of a basement that did not count allowable coverage was originally implemented specifically to help non-conforming lots lessen the neighborhood impact, not as an absolute or in addition to substantially surpassing allowable coverage as this house proposes. Almost done. There have been a few comments about the participants being nice people, having kids that play together, or about helping family as reasons why this house should be approved or given special treatment. These are all nice sentiments, but truly have no bearing on the situation. Any form of favoritism should not weigh in or be a consideration any differently than if a decision was based on age, sex, race, or marital status, none of which are allowed. No one is telling these people that they can't build a house. The point is that they should build a house that follows the rules just like thousands of others in this town have adhered to, and hopefully with a little respect and consideration to the neighborhood and its concerns residents, we will all benefit. Thank you.
Is that all of your comments?
I hope so.
Well, thank you. I know it was very thorough. I just wanted to make sure you were done.
But the point being, if you allow me just 1 second here, is that meeting served no purpose. We had no suggestions for compromise or solution. It was interrupted. We were not allowed to discuss anything, and we were provided no additional information to help process the thoughts better, or make any determinations or suggestions, or perhaps even consider the fact that some of us may have been wrong about something. There were no renderings, which is something that I believe was instructed by the commission, and no mention of that. No full-size plans, no survey, no color drawings, no walking around saying, see, this is where it actually is.
Okay, I think you've gotten to your 3 minutes.
Made my point. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for that.
Right.
I'm going to ask if any commissioners have questions for you, and it looks like Commissioner Janoff has a question.
Thank you. Darren, can you please restate your address?
I own the houses at the 546 San Benito Avenue, which technically shouldn't be involved with this because I'm not in that parking district, and my front house faces San Benito and 120 Olive Street. 122 Olive Street, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for the speaker? Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes, is it your position that the setbacks for this proposed house must be in strict accordance with the code? I thought you might have said something to the contrary.
I don't understand why they can't be, because it's not going to change the integrity or the design of the house by meeting the code. It would follow the rules. I mean, if they want to remodel it, follow those rules. If they want to build new, follow those. I'm not opposed to either one. I just think that they have to be a consistency here, because I think that's what the rules are for, first off. And second of all, for the exact reasons that Shelley Baker and Bonnie Hurwitz mentioned, that once these people get 5 exceptions to the rules or variances, the next guy comes down the road and says, well, I just need one more, so pretty soon we're going to have
to my question. I appreciate that answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, staff, is there anyone else that wants to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Anyone else that wishes to speak from the public on this item, please raise your hand. I don't see any other hands raised, Chair.
Okay, very good. And so then we will go back to the applicant, and the applicant has up to 3 minutes to respond to any of the comments that were just made.
Mr. Plett, you can unmute yourself and you have up to 3 minutes.
Hello, just wanted to say thanks for everyone who commented in the public. I also wanted to point out that, yes, we invited people to our home. Those were not the only 2 opportunities everyone had. We gave everyone our phone number, our email, and invited them to 2 times that worked for us. We didn't receive any other form of communication other than the one time they all came together at once on the second meeting. So there was no other outreach where if they had felt that the information they needed wasn't properly provided, that they reached out to consume or gather that information. I also want to point out that, we weren't necessarily having all the doors and gates open at the house, but no one also asked to walk to the backyard. They did walk to the side yard from the neighbor's spot. Some of them did. They were on our property looking at the flags. No one asked for the plans. We had them all in the house. If we talked for more than an hour and not at one point did someone ask to see them, I had them right inside the door. I also want to mention that, both in my not necessarily understanding, as well as I think I heard some of the public comments talking about variances, we're not asking for any variances. We're asking 2 exceptions for the code that specifically allow us these types of exceptions for non-conforming lots.
And we're consistent with the neighborhood.
Yeah, and we're consistent with the neighborhood. I just wanted to point out one specific thing with Shelley and Keith's home. which they talk about our setbacks and our two-story. And I just want to point out that they're potentially the most impacted home, which I agree with, but their home has a 3-foot setback. It's two-story. Its front yard setback is less than 15 feet and doesn't have a 20-foot driveway. We literally are proposing the same house as theirs. So it's, and with a compliant driveway, it's basically the same. And I just want to make it, I know our previous documentation has been clear that there's context to the neighborhood and why planning department recommended for approval, and why in the last meeting you guys, the planning commission mentioned it fits with the context, but we wanted more time to have the neighborly talks. I know we outlined all that, but I want to point out the house that they say is the most affected has all of the same exceptions that we're requesting, every single one. Yeah, Jay, I don't know if you want to point out anything else in the last minute.
Yeah, I would say that, that staff found the project worthy of approval, and that we are consistent with the patterns of the neighborhood. We're even more compliant than most of the houses in the neighborhood when it comes to setbacks. And we are not the largest. We do not have the largest floor area. And I would point you to look at sheet A1.1 of the plans. And if you go to the second drawing down from the top, it's the Olive Street looking at the project. It's a street elevation. And you can see the house on San Benito, how tall it is and how things are falling down. And the house at 120 in its height.
Your time. He's raising his hand.
Okay, sorry. I was looking at the plans.
Okay, so are you completed with your comments?
Yes.
Okay. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? This would be the last opportunity. Commissioner Jana.
Thank you. I actually have several questions, but
go ahead.
Then okay. So I just wanted to step through some of the concerns that were raised from the speakers tonight. There was one regarding the destruction that construction would cause to the underlying soils, perhaps. It would be my understanding that the architect and geotechnical planning for this would ensure that that destruction would not occur. Mr. Platt, can you respond to that?
What was the question?
It's about the contractor's ability to keep the neighboring soil.
Yes, the basement will be constructed with stitch piers, which is a way of shoring straight down with the cut for the basement. So there will not be any slope instabilities that will be created with the way that the method that will be used to construct the basement. And there's also been a soils report that we have produced ahead of time by a very reputable soils engineer. And the soil is very good. It's very stable. It's not loose, and it's very conducive to the construction of a basement on a small site like that.
All right, thank you. The next question has to do with the rear balcony. I think we heard that the neighbors appreciated the removal of the front balcony. I don't see a rear balcony on the elevation that you provided that would impact 120. If I read your plans, it would appear that any second story visibility would be on the opposite side of the house in the rear. Is that correct?
So the rear deck
on the ground.
Yeah, it's just coming out of the sliding door on the ground floor. There's no, I think it's just a nomenclature that it's called the deck. It's just a walk where you walk off of the back door.
So it isn't a second story balcony.
No. And that was also clarified in the first planning meeting. Yes.
I thought so, but since it came up today again, I just wanted to further clarify. This is for the either. Do I understand from reading the letter that you provided in the desk item that the house currently has the same setbacks as the proposed structure would have? Is that, did I read that correctly?
No, the current house, the two things that would change, it's currently sited in the exact place as the new plan, except for two: the garage being a little wider to comply, and the front being extended for the streetscape.
Let me be more clear. Is the setback that borders 120, is it currently 3 feet, or are you changing it from 5 to 3 with the garage?
Currently 5 feet, and we're changing it from 5 to 3 only for the first level of the home at the garage.
She's asking for 120.
Yeah, that's,
Just on the property side that borders 120.
yeah. On the first story next to the garage, it gets 2 feet closer, but not on the second story.
And right there.
Let me keep going. There was a recommendation that you move the house back and over. Can you do that and stay within all of the setbacks, or does that create an issue for the opposite side or the rear?
Does create one directly for the opposite side if there was no changes, and for the rear, I'm unclear what the rear setback is. But we are citing it to be at the exact same position for the respect of the back neighbor, who actually we talked to at the beginning of the process, and asked us not to have a house that overlooks their backyard. So that's kind of the reasonings from early conversations of the planning process.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your answers.
Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. So this is kind of along the lines of Commissioner Janoff's question, but it seemed to me that clearly there's a lot of public concern about this, and a theme that came up was that they're upset about the exceeding the FAR and reducing the setbacks. And so, and since it's a demolition, that would theoretically have been possible to do at the beginning. And I understand that you could reduce the or leave the front setback and just have a smaller backyard. And so I wanted to ask why specifically you chose to change those, and what kind of problems it would cause for you to conform.
Yeah, was your question, why did we choose to go from a renovation to a new build?
So the question is, given that you're doing a new build, why was it necessary to exceed the FAR and to reduce the setbacks?
Yeah, I think it's hard to answer that question specifically, because that's not the, and that's why I gave the context in the desk item of the history of the development of the project. So the entire project was developed as a remodel. And as we went through the process, we were outweighing like how, we didn't necessarily want to pay the prices and do the work to underground utilities, put in fire sprinklers, lift the house and do all this stuff. So it became a discussion point with the planning department of like, what if we were able to get able to do a new project, what would be the things we'd have to do that we wouldn't have to be required to do as a renovation? So the design of the house as a renovation was completed and essentially approvable to come to commission, but there was no changes from the design after we've made those decisions. It was, I don't know if that answers the question.
Maybe I can add on that. Sorry, this is Meredith. I think the FAR, right, has to do with the lot size, and that's consistent with other houses on Olive Street. So again, we just tried to make that consistent with the neighborhood, so it wasn't, a big mammoth house in the middle, but a house that would work for our family, but still fit with the neighborhood. And again, yes, the 3-foot setback on the side was because we started as a remodel, and then now that we're a new build, I get that theoretically you could think like, oh, well, let's change that. But I think to change that either means a non-compliant garage or shifting our house in a way that it affects a setback on the other side, which doesn't work, or we build a more narrow house that doesn't work for an actual livable kitchen. So it's hard to come up with a successful solution on that one.
And I'd also say on sheet A 1.1, if you look at the neighborhood plan, the lots are small. So no matter what we do, if you look, there's a 4-foot setback at 112, 114 is 10 feet. Across the street, 133 is 7-foot front setback. We have a smaller setback at 131. 125 has a 5-foot front setback, no driveway. So what we have done, we've designed a house that is very much in the pattern of the neighborhood. And we are not asking for the greatest floor area, the greatest FAR, nor the smallest, shortest setback on a side, nor the smallest, shortest setback in the front. So the house that we have designed falls right in the middle pattern of what the neighborhood is like. And
Okay.
that's why staff found the project worthy of approval, because it fits in the neighborhood.
Thank you. And can I just ask one follow-up on that?
Go ahead.
So for the front setback, I remember from our previous meeting that the reason you reduced the front setback, even though you had a large enough back setback, was because you want to have backyard area. And so would you consider maintaining the front setback and having a smaller backyard in order to appease some of the neighbors' concerns?
I think a little bit that shifts the problem then to our back neighbor. That was a little bit of the comment from Thomas to the previous question, that they had requested that we don't come closer, as well as maintaining the space. If it meant we could build our house or not, we would go back and revisit that conversation with the back neighbor, absolutely. But we believe this still fits the neighborhood as it is.
And I think, the back neighbor is similar to us. They have kids and they play back there, and we hear each other's kids bouncing on the trampoline and singing back there, and potentially our windows would look over their neighborhood, over into their backyard, and I think that's a valid concern, similar to how we're making concessions with 120 Olive to not have our patio in the front. It's it's really hard to appease everyone, which we've heard. There's a handful of neighbors, so I think Meredith's point is, of course, if it only meant we can do it, I think there would be a reason, but I don't think pushing one person's problem onto another was the approach that we were taking when we designed the house.
Okay, yeah, and I actually hadn't realized you had talked to the back neighbor, so that's good clarification. Thank you.
So did you get your questions answered, Commissioner Clark? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I just wanted to loop back regarding the setback on the garage side. As I recall, one of the drivers for that was to create a conforming garage to enable the cars to be parked in the garage or in the driveway. Well, that doesn't affect the setback. Instead of being parked on the street, could the applicant please confirm that that was the motivation for widening the garage so that you can alleviate some of the parking issues?
I would say, I don't know if it was the chicken or the egg, but as part of the planning department, review before we even were up for planning commission, it all happened together. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the 3 foot is only on the first floor.
Yeah. And the 3 foot's only on the first floor. That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Vice Chair Barnett.
I made a note that there are 4 homes in the immediate neighborhood that have larger FARs. Can you confirm that? Or do I have my information written down wrong?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to confirm along the lines of Vice Chair Barnett's questioning. If I recall from the last hearing, you had documented that there were multiple other neighbors on your within the immediate neighborhood that had exceeded the floor area ratio. And also, I thought that you had a chart with people that had similar side and front setbacks. Is that correct?
That's also correct.
Okay. So, my recollection was that you had established that there was consistency with the neighborhood for the exceptions that you were asking for.
That's also my understanding of the takeaway of the last meeting. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant before I close the public hearing? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so I'm going to close the public hearing and ask if any commissioners have questions for staff, wish to comment on the application, or wish to make a motion. Commissioner Janoff.
Thank you. I think that the applicant did what we requested them to do, which would be to provide opportunities for more neighborhood outreach. They did make a couple of changes to the plans that enhance the privacy for neighbors. So I feel satisfied that the applicant conducted their work to the satisfaction of the Planning Commission. Regarding the concerns of setback, it seems clear to me that if you move this house, so this is an overly constrained problem, and any direction of improving the setbacks to meet town code will create a problem for another neighbor, one side or the other or the back. Given that the setback of 3 feet is on the side, 1 story only, and it's the garage side and creates a conforming garage, I'm comfortable with approving that reduced setback. I also don't have an issue with the floor area ratio.
Okay, thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for staff or wish to comment on the application? Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Janoff that they did what we asked of them, and definitely to our satisfaction. They gave extensive reports of the outreach that they did, but I did find that some of the comments from neighbors concerning, and I just think that it's worth discussing some of the concerns that were brought up. Something that I was particularly struck by was the comment about the concern that if it becomes a precedent for cottage purchases to become tear downs to build larger homes, that could start being a pattern that we see. And they bought this property very recently, probably knowing that this was the plan, and it's important to have this variety of homes and to have these cottages that stay cottages, so that people will be able to afford them. And while I think that in this case, they did their due diligence, and I think they do have reasonable reasons to expand their property, I think that it is something to keep in mind going forward.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think that was very helpful. Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up the issue, Commissioner Clark, of whether or not this sets a precedent. And I wanted to loop back to our prior meeting when there was also discussion around, does this set a precedent? We've heard a lot of complaints about oversized houses, reduced setbacks, and so forth. One thing that we didn't mention at the last meeting regarding these questions and yours tonight is the obligation of the Planning Commission, or the responsibility of the Planning Commission, is to hear each application as a brand new, stand on its own merits application. We specifically don't apply what we've done, the decisions that we've made on houses in the same neighborhood. We look at each application on its own terms, its own merits. Every application is unique, and so the guidance that we've always provided and been given and provided to each other is that we are looking at these de novo, that there isn't a precedent to be set, and so I think that's helpful going forward, and that's the way I see this particular application tonight. But it's a good question, and we should keep talking about it.
And I will also comment, because I was the one that made the motion to continue the item. If I recall, at our last meeting, the commission general feeling was that the plans were appropriate for the project and the neighborhood, and that the only issue was making sure that the neighbors had an opportunity to be heard. And from my point of view, I felt that that the applicant did a good job of reaching out to the neighbors. It's really impossible for anyone to be in a situation where they could possibly know to address every concern of every single neighbor, but they did open up their property to talk to people, and I felt like they did an excellent job of documenting all the conversations that they had. And so I don't know that anything has changed from where we were before, which was that this is a relatively modest, given the size of the house growth for the family, and that it isn't going to exceed any of the existing boundaries in the neighborhood, which is the floor area ratios of other properties that have exceeded, as well as the setbacks. So from my perspective, I don't know that there's I think the applicant's done what we asked. And as far as the renderings are concerned, one of the speakers did bring it up. We didn't ask maybe we could have, but we did not ask the applicant to produce renderings specifically for the neighborhood outreach. It was to help the commission understand, and those are a matter of public record as well. So it's not that no one couldn't have seen them, but it wasn't part of our direction that I recall that they had to produce those specifically for the neighborhood outreach. So do other commissioners have any comments that they'd like to make, or would any commissioner like to make a motion? Vice Chair Barnett.
Well, I have a comment and I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay.
The comment is that I'm very sympathetic to the concerns regarding loss of view, but we've been told repeatedly by the town attorney that that's not an embedded legal right. And I don't know if the attorney's online here today, so he could confirm that, but that's been his legal advice on a number of matters to date.
And so
through the chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chair. Mr. Schultz is not able to join us, but I can confirm that Mr. Barnett's statement, Commissioner Barnett's statement, is accurate. He has stated that repeatedly.
Does that answer your question, Vice Chair Barnett?
Yes.
Okay. So would anyone else want to comment on the application or make a motion? Vice Chair Barnett, you had said that you would be prepared to make a motion, but do you have other questions that you'd like answered?
No, I'm prepared to proceed.
Okay.
Concerning 118 Olive Street, I move approval of the demolition of the existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence to exceed the floor area ratio standards with reduced front and side yard setbacks on non-conforming property zoned R-1D, APN 410-15-022, architecture and site application 5-21-013, property owner Thomas and Meredith Reichert. In terms of the findings, I can make the finding that the proposed project is categorically exempt pursuant to the adopted guidelines for the implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act, Section 15303, new construction. 2, I can make the findings as required by Section 29.10-09030E of the Town Code for the demolition of the existing structure. 3, I can make the finding that the project complies with the objective standards of Chapter 29 of the Town Code, with the exception of the request to exceed the FAR standards for reduction of the front and side setbacks and for an exemption from the parking requirement. 4, I can make the finding as required by Section 29.40-075C of the Town Code for granting approval of an exception to the FAR standards. 5, I can make the findings as required by Section 29.10-265, subparagraph 3 of the Town Code for modification of zoning rules on non-conforming lots, including setback requirements. 6, I can make the finding as required by Section 29.10.150H2 of the Town Code for reducing parking where it can be shown that the lot does not have adequate area to provide parking as required. 7, I can make the finding as required by the town's residential design guidelines that the project complies with the residential design guidelines. 8, I can make the consideration as required by Section 29.20.150 of the Town Code for granting approval of an architectural and site application. And finally, number 9, I approve architecture and site application S-21-003 with the conditions contained in Exhibit 3 and the development plans in Exhibit 11.
Thank you for that very thorough motion. Do we have a second for Vice Chair Barnett's motion? Commissioner Raspy.
I second the motion as presented.
Okay, very good. Are there any commissioners that wish to make any additional comments before I call the question? I don't see any hands raised, so I will call the question, and by roll call, please vote yes, no, or abstain. Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Raspy,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So the motion passes 5-0. And Director Paulson, are there appeal rights for this action by the commission?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available online and in the clerk's office. There is a fee for filing the appeal. The appeal must be filed in 10 days, and the deadline on the 10th day is 4 p.m. for a submittal.
Okay, thank you for that, Director Paulson. So then we will move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is requesting approval for the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence with an exemption from the parking requirements, exemption for the maximum lot coverage, and site work requiring a grading permit on non-conforming property, pre-zoned R18. And it is located at 15605 Gatos Lane, APN 532-22-010, architecture and site application S-21-20. Property owner Natasha Malisic. I hope I haven't butchered the last name, and you can correct me. Applicant Archiana Jane. Hopefully I pronounced that as correctly. And then our project planner is Ryan Safety. And I want to start with asking the commissioners if there are any disclosures that they would like to make on this item. And may I see a show of hands from commissioners who have visited the property? Okay, it looks like everyone. So I understand Mr. Safety will be giving this staff report.
Good evening, and thank you, commissioners. Before you is a proposal to demolish an existing single-family residence and construct a new single-family residence at 15605 Gatos Lane, pre-zoned R18. The property has been approved for annexation by the Town Council and is pending LAFCO review. Condition of approval number 15 would require certification from LAFCO prior to building permit issuance. The applicant is proposing to replace the existing 1,268 square foot single-story residence and 276 square foot attached garage with a new 2,513 square foot single-story residence and 432 square foot attached garage. The proposed residence would have a textured plaster finish with a composition shingle roof and standing seam metal roof accents along 4 sides. The proposal would be approximately 20 feet tall when the maximum allowed is 30 feet. The proposed residence is in compliance with the allowable floor area, height, and setbacks, but includes requests for an exemption from the parking requirements and an exception for maximum lot coverage. In terms of parking, the town code requires 2 on-site parking spaces to be located outside of the front setback requirement. The existing development has 1 parking space within the attached garage and 1 driveway parking space in tandem with the garage space. The applicant is proposing a similar configuration, except that the second space within the front setback would be offset from the garage space. Town Code Section 2910-150, subsection H2 allows an exemption from the parking requirement when the deciding body finds that the subject property does not have adequate area to provide parking as required. The applicant provided justification for this parking exemption, provided as Exhibit 8 of the report. The subject property is 54.6 feet in width. With 8-foot side yard setback requirements, the maximum allowed floor plan is limited to 34 feet in width. An attached 2-car garage would further limit the front facade to 14 feet in width. In order to develop their desired floor plan, the applicant is requesting an exemption to allow the second required parking space to be located along the driveway within the front setback and offset from the garage parking space. In Exhibit 8, the applicant analyzed 129 properties in the surrounding neighborhoods and found that over half of the properties within this pocket of Santa Clara County jurisdiction would not comply with the town's parking requirements. In terms of lot coverage, the maximum allowed is 40%. The applicant is proposing 40.6%, which would be 51.5 square feet over the maximum for the lot. The lot is non-conforming as to minimum frontage, and per Town Code Section 2910-265, which allows for modifications of any rule of the zone for non-conforming lots if the modifications are found to be compatible with the neighborhood. The applicant requests this exemption to the maximum allowed lot coverage in order to maximize the development potential of the property. Town staff has verified one property in the surrounding neighborhoods that exceed the town's maximum lot coverage, and that is 2 blocks over 15611 Loma Vista, which has a lot coverage of 44%. There are also several other properties along El Gato Lane that appear to exceed that 40% lot coverage. However, the property data that the town obtains from the assessor's office only includes permitted building floor area, and therefore staff cannot verify that they exceed 40%. Things like covered porches, certain accessory buildings, and unpermitted additions are not included in the data from the assessor's office. The application was reviewed by the town's consulting architect for compliance with the town's residential design guidelines. The consultant found that the proposed height and bulk would be compatible with the neighborhood, but identified several design issues. Although the applicant responded to each recommendation and made plan revisions in an attempt with recommendation, staff cannot find that the project is compliant with the recommendations, and therefore the project as currently proposed is not compliant with the residential design guidelines. Specifically, the consultant recommend that the garage be recessed by a minimum of 3 feet and that the roof form and side elevation be broken up and better articulated. Staff has added draft condition of approval 16, requiring that the applicant work with staff and the consultant to revise the plans to comply with the residential design guidelines prior to building permit submittal. The proposed residence would not be the largest in terms of FAR in the immediate neighborhood, but it would be the largest in terms of floor area by 1 square foot. However, if we expanded that immediate neighborhood by 1 additional property across the street, the proposed residence would no longer be the largest in the immediate neighborhood. Again, the project is in compliance with the maximum allowed floor area, height, and setbacks. The applicant has provided justification for the parking exemption and lot coverage exception requests, demonstrating consistency with the immediate and surrounding neighborhood. With draft condition of approval 16, the application would also comply with the residential design guidelines. Based on the discussion provided in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the application subject to the conditions of approval and required findings. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Safdie, for that very detailed report. And I would like to ask if any of the commissioners have questions for staff at this time. Let's see, first up was Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I just have a quick clarification question. So it was my understanding that they created these plans before they knew that they would be annexed into the town of Los Gatos. And so they were not aware of certain guidelines that they would need to fit within, which to me would explain why they're only 0.6% over the maximum allowable lot coverage. Can you clarify or confirm that?
That is correct. The application, or sorry, the property owner was informed after designing the plans that the county would require annexation into the town. So this is that same proposal that was designed for the county.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. One quick question. As I understand the parking, the requested exception is to allow parking within the setback. Will that be a finished parking space within the setback? Will it be gravel? Do you know what the applicant contemplates putting within the setback?
I believe the plans, and sorry, thank you for the question. I believe the plans show asphalt as a widened driveway area.
Thank you very much. That answers my question.
Okay, and Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from the applicant before I pose questions in that regard, but there was one exhibit that was attached regarding geological concerns, specifically that the San Andreas Fault runs through this property and there would be consequences. Could staff confirm? I was not aware that the San Andreas Fault runs through this property, through Los Gatos.
Thank you for the question. I can take a stab at it, and if Mr. Weiss in Parks and Public Works can chime in if I missed anything. It is not our understanding that the San Andreas Fault runs through this property. They did prepare a geotechnical and soils report, and there were no concerns brought up within that report.
All right, thank you. That was my next question, whether there was a geotechnical report or would be required in order to go forward. And you're saying that that geotechnical report has been prepared, and is it sufficient, or does the town require anything in addition, since this might have been prepared while they were working with the county?
Perhaps Mr. Weiss can answer that question, or Mr. Sparks in Parks and Public Works, but I do know that they added a condition of approval to the project, making sure that all those recommendations from the geotechnical report be complied with.
Yes, thank you, Mike Weiss, Senior Civil Engineer. Yeah, that's a customary condition of approval for a building application that were to come in for an application like this. It would be expected that a soils report would be submitted. It already has been submitted, and there's nothing out of the ordinary that has been provided with that document.
Answer your question.
Did Mr. Sparks care to add anything to that?
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's customary for us to get a soils report in this situation, but there was nothing else in the initial application that triggered an additional review from our town consultant. So.
Great, thank you very much for that.
I have a follow-up question to Commissioner Janos' question, which is simply that I'm comfortable that there's a soils report, but in my years on the Planning Commission, I've not seen a note like this that came through. Not that we haven't had people complain about the geological stability of the site, but this letter kind of came out of the blue. Is this unusual, or the organization that submitted it, what would be, is it like a watchdog group, or could you maybe comment on why we would have even seen this?
I'm not sure as to what the group is, and I have not seen a public comment letter with such expansive details as this one, so it's a little out of the ordinary. But yeah, as previously said, it is not located within the San Andreas fault itself. It did not trigger a geotechnical peer review, as Mr. Sparks mentioned. So this is these are all public comment is warranted. However, in this instance, it seems to be a little more information than necessary, but we're welcome to receive it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions for staff? Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I just have one more question about the parking. So I saw they currently have a 276 square foot garage, and they're now going to have a 432 square foot garage. And so I wanted to ask if they're already not compliant with the parking requirements, and if they already have a spot within the setback.
Thank you for the question. Let me know if I'm not answering this correctly, but yes, the existing property has a single car garage. That single car garage does appear to be conforming. So the existing property has one town conforming parking space. Yes, the proposal would be over 400 square feet for the new garage. However, it would only fit a single parking space per our requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, so then we will move on, and we will invite the applicant to speak to the commission for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Whoever is going to be speaking on behalf of the applicant, please raise your hand. We will allow Arcana to speak.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
I'm Archana, and I'm the architect for this project. As Ryan has already given a very good presentation, that basically we would like to demolish the existing house and construct a single-story new 4-bedroom, 4-bath house for my client. And as the lot is very narrow, we are requesting an exception for 1 parking space. And for the lot coverage, basically, we are having the front entry door and the back entry door and a side porch covered, which is requiring that extra 51 square foot. And as Ryan had explained, that this plans were developed based on the requirements of the county, which met all the county setbacks, etc. So the only exceptions came out to be that the parking and the lot coverage. In terms of architecture, yes, we have worked with Ryan and the planning department and the architect's comments to make sure that we could make the style consistent, especially with the roofing material. And then he wanted to break up the sides also, which we have provided some awnings. But as you will see that basically the site is so narrow with a 30-degree angle view, if we are going on either side of Elgato, the remaining side of the roof will not be visible. And the main reason we have kept the roof line very consistent in the back and straight is because, first of all, it's a narrow lot. We don't want to indent more and lose more area in the house. As well as, we want to make this a very economic house for construction, to have like trusses so that they can just go straight and build out straight at the back. So that was our main reason. We are not requesting any setback exceptions or anything. We are following whatever the town as well as earlier the county's setback requirements were. This house, even today, if anybody has seen in the neighborhood, it's a very neatly done landscaped house, and I would say one of the well-kept house, and not like, parking spilling over on the sidewalk. And my client also wishes to maintain, even in future when she does this house, that to use her front yard with a front landscape that she has already created, as well as on the side, she does wish to keep all the plants, etc., and make it properly landscaped. We are requesting for a couple of trees to be removed, which are non-heritage trees. And we would like to request that if Planning Commission can support us on the exception for the parking and the lot coverage, as well as on the architecture. Yes, we are willing to work with the planning department, but also our main concern is that we do not want to make many changes due to the rear is not visible from the street on either side or from the sides, because it's a very narrow lot and all the lots are similar 54 feet wide in this entire neighborhood. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, but if anybody has any questions, I'm ready to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and I will ask if any commissioners have questions for the applicant, and it looks like Commissioner Raspy does.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Jane, for your presentation. One quick question. I think Commissioner Clark alluded to the fact that these plans were started under Santa Clara rules and then transitioned to Los Gatos rules, which may have affected the lot coverage. You're so close on the lot coverage, within 51.5 feet. I'm curious as to why you didn't try to find those additional square feet to make this home in compliance with the Los Gatos rules. Thank you.
The main reason was because of the porches. So if you will see the plans, we've got the front porch and a very small rear porch and side porch that is covered. And my client really wanted to keep those porches, and because this house was designed with a truss system already, so if we do modify it, we'll have to again restructure the entire house. But if that is something that we have to do it, we will take a look at it. But those were the only reasons that we asked for this exception.
Thank you for answering my question.
And do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Clark, and then Vice Chair Barnett.
Thank you. So a theme that I noticed in your responses to the consulting architect's recommendations was saying that the surrounding houses don't have any architectural style, and it felt to me like you were pretty hostile toward the residential design guidelines that were suggested. And so, I mean, that's why they have draft condition of approval number 16, which would require you to work with staff to meet the residential design guidelines. And given your seeming hostility to some of the guidelines, I just wanted to ask if you would be willing to make some more changes to your property and work with the staff, if that was what we ended up recommending.
Sure, we are willing to work with the staff, as well as the other thing is most of the properties are actually county properties. They are not the town properties. So we are not actually, affecting the town residential guidelines. It was more like we wanted a nice, large inviting entry. So kind of what we were pointing out is that the entryways of most of the neighborhood out over there, which is a mostly Eichler style, and some of even the homes which have been done or redone are not like as inviting. So it's mostly, we wanted to like, clarify that we are making the house inviting and appealing, and not making it like, a narrow entry where anybody enters, it feels like they are entering into a claustrophobic 3 feet wide entryway or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners? Vice Chair Barnett.
My question was similar to Commissioner Clark's question, but I note that in the report of Mr. Cannon, he suggested an alternative relating to the facade. I was wondering if you had a position regarding that.
Yes, my client really likes the style of architecture, and we worked for over a year to get to the style that she wanted. So that was mainly, but what he recommended, like in terms of the materials to make it more consistent, like initially we had standing seam metal roof in the front and then composite shingle roof in the back. We did change that. We added some awning elements like on the front, the garage door, the entry door, as well as accent awnings on the sides also, as he suggested. So we have like, kind of worked with him, but on the style, this is what my client has liked. So I've just been kind of, giving what she wanted.
If I might follow up, Chair.
Go ahead.
Mr. Cannon had raised some concerns about the architecture of the roof and suggested the use of a shed and flat roof to conform more to the neighborhood. I was wondering what your position is on that suggestion.
The reason we didn't go with that was for the height, because all the existing homes are Eichler homes, and that's where the flat roof came from. And, right now today, we have to follow even with the 2019 building codes where we have to meet all the net zero energy requirements. We want to make sure that we have a proper attic, which is insulated, and even for the ducts, etc., for our air conditioning and heating. And we can provide enough of even the walls, which are made like 2x6 walls, are mainly so that we can get enough of insulation so we can have a more energy efficient home.
I see. Thank you very much for that response.
And Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, to the architect, you seem, as Commissioner Clark indicated, resistant to incorporating the changes of the consulting architect has recommended. The conditions of approval indicate that there will be further conversation between you and staff so that those conditions will be met, or the recommendations will be met. And I'm hearing that you are, or your client is wedded to the architecture that might be at odds with what the consulting architect is recommending. So my question is, will you be able to comply with the condition of approval number 16, which says you will work with staff in order to conform to the consulting architect's recommendations?
Yeah, we are willing to work, and we've spoken to Ryan about that. We are willing to work with the planning department as well as a consulting architect and make sure that we can come to a reasonable meeting point and, get something that is conforming to my client's requirements as well as the consulting architect and the planning department's requirements.
Okay, just to follow up, in this case, it would be the expectation that your client might need to provide some concessions in order to meet town requirements or the consulting architect's requirements. I just wanted to make sure that the client would be willing to do that.
Yes, she is.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? All right, and so then we will move on to public comment if we have any. This would be a time for any members of the public to comment on this application.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public to speak on this item. Just give it a couple seconds. Seeing none.
Okay. And oh no, that's the applicant, isn't it? Okay. All right. So we will have an opportunity for the applicant to come and speak again, but it looks like we have no comments from the public at this time. So then we give the applicant another 3 minutes to raise any additional points before we close the public hearing. So it looks like the property owner has her hand raised.
Yeah, so Natasha, you are unmuted, so you can go ahead and speak. You have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You know, I just
Yes.
have a question about the design of the house. I understand everything that Mr. Cannon sent to me, and he's moving towards like, you know, this, and I love the Eichler style. I love all of that. I truly do. But this neighborhood is changing. All the houses that are in the unincorporated area, they look nothing like this neighborhood. And I don't know what house is going to be annexed and what house is not. But I mean, if you drive down, it's such an eclectic neighborhood. My style is so simple, it's so clean, it's timeless, actually. So I don't understand what the push is for the flat roof, which actually could be problematic for leaking and for this and for that. And for like, I'm confused as with the eclecticness and like the county and the town of Los Gatos in this neighborhood, why the style, which is so plain and simple and pure and beautiful, is like a concern for anybody.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments. The way that we format this hearing is that we can ask you questions. So I will see if any of the commissioners want to ask you any questions relative to what you stated.
Okay.
And did you or your architect want to make any additional comments? Because I think you had time left in your 3 minutes.
I have an additional comment. Like if you keep intact with, you know, and Mr. Cannon's recommendations were fine. They're not my style, but I have a few homes on this street that look like the brand new builds, or I'm sorry, not brand new builds, but renovations that are very similar to my style. So it's not that it wouldn't fit in the neighborhood. You know, these may be town of Los Gatos requirements or suggestions, but at the same time, when you have the county also involved and there's completely different things happening, you have to take both into consideration. And personally, I think my house is going to be beautiful.
Okay. Do you have any other comments besides that? And
not right now.
Okay. I will ask the commission if you have any questions for the applicant. Commissioner Raspi.
Thank you. Just one quick question to make sure that you are aligned with your architect. It's proposed to us that if approved, one of the conditions of approval would be that you would continue to work with the town architect and town staff to make sure that the building is in compliance with design guidelines. Your architect has indicated that she would be willing to make and have those discussions. I just want to confirm that you two are willing to have those discussions.
Yes, and we have. I've taken some of Mr. Cannon's recommendations about awnings in the front and, you know, or, you know, he had, yes, there's some, listen, I want the house to have dimension. This is not my dream house. I would like it to look a little bit different, but with this narrow lot, I'm a little bit limited. But I do want, you know, dimension and all these kind of things. Yes, I do. I'm willing, but not on like, you know, somebody mentioned earlier, the flat roof. I'm not doing that.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question.
Do any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing and ask the commission if they would want to ask any additional questions of staff, comment on the application, or wish to make a motion. I don't see any hands raised. I could go ahead and start. Oh, Commissioner Gatos.
Yeah, question for staff. I don't recall in the time that I've been on the Planning Commission, the resolution of the consulting architect's concerns that haven't been made by the homeowner have been incorporated as a condition of approval. I might be mistaken, but this seems the first time I've seen this. Given what I read as a fairly adamant applicant in terms of wanting her style, period, how confident does staff feel that you are going to be able to reach a resolution regarding the distance you might be apart on the remaining issues from the consulting architect?
So, Mr. Safdie, I'm happy to jump in. This is unique. Typically, we have folks that are a lot closer, and there's just little differences in what the consulting architect had recommended. And it looks like in this case, there's a couple different approaches that he provided potential options for. Listening to the testimony this evening, it seemed like there was some reception to that from the architect, little bit less so potentially from the applicant, which I understand. And we wanted them to have the opportunity that if Planning Commission thought, we were being too rigorous in our interpretation of those recommendations, how they were implemented, then the Planning Commission would have that opportunity to discuss it. But this is unique. We don't see this very often, given the history and that it was designed with the county regulations in mind, which obviously have far less stringent architectural requirements, if any, that we thought it would provide them the benefit of the doubt to come forward to the Planning Commission, have that discussed this evening by you, and then moving forward, whatever your determination is, we would take that forward. Should we not be able to come to some type of an agreement that's amenable to the property owner and to the consulting architect and staff, then the next step would probably be coming back for a recommendation to modify that condition with whatever additional changes, if any, were made by the applicant.
All right, it seems like an efficient way to go forward. I guess I would have more confidence if I sensed that the applicant was more amenable to concession. Thank you.
If I may, through the chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Armour.
From listening to the comments that were shared this evening from the property owner, it seemed like they were very focused on the flat roof and that component, that particular recommendation from the consulting architect, that style, and kind of the general style of that recommendation. And it's not uncommon that the initial report from our consulting architect has certain recommendations, but that there are other ways to respond to those concerns. And so, in hearing that seemed to be the predominant concern from the property owner, it may be that with other methods for addressing the concerns without having to do the flat roof, that there could be some resolution.
Thank you for that, Ms. Armour. I think that was a really helpful comment. Yeah, I had the same concern that some of you have already made, which is that I sensed from the applicant's written comments in our staff report, and then hearing again tonight, I sensed more willingness from the architect than from the property owner. However, in the time I've been on the Planning Commission, which has been many years so far, I have rarely felt that the consulting architect has overstepped his boundaries in terms of making solid recommendations about how to help applicants comply with their residential design guidelines. And after hearing Ms. Armour speak on the subject as well, there's probably a number of ways for the applicant to address the concerns of the consulting architect through working with staff to get closer to our residential design guidelines, which that is one of the really unique and important things that we have in Los Gatos is our residential design guidelines that really help us to keep the town Los Gatos the way that the residents want it. And so not a lot of other jurisdictions in Santa Clara County take this much care with it, but we do. So I'm hopeful that there is a resolution coming closer to meeting the residential design guidelines with the condition of approval, and I'm happy that staff went ahead and put that forward. Is there other comments that the commissioners would like to make? Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. I have a kind of follow-up question on that for staff, which is, so they did seem the most hostile toward the flat roof, and we are saying that there are lots of other ways to meet the residential design guidelines, but my question is why that didn't happen then, like why they didn't take some of those routes to be able to meet the guidelines. And I'm wondering if there does just need to be more conversation and maybe there wasn't enough time to go back and forth, or if there's some other reason for that.
Yes, and thank you for the question. So generally, when we get a consulting architect report, it's split up in two sections. There's the issues and concerns section and the recommendations section. Now, what we generally need to see as staff is that adequate responses have been made to the issues and concerns. There's always going to be different recommendations that can be made. And in the past, we have gone back to the consultant to have him look at the current rendition based on the design changes that have been made. And so there's a good chance in this case, when it goes back to the consultant, it may not be as focused as much on the flat roofs. He may have other recommendations to help bring this into conformity.
Great, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Jana.
In following up on the chair's comment about how the consulting architect rarely seems to overstep boundaries, one thing I'd like to point out is this was a surprise to me that there was a street full of Eichlers in Los Gatos, and I'm sorry I haven't driven down El Gato Lane before to see that. And the Eichler architecture is pretty important to this area. It's important. So I, for one, appreciated that the consulting architect was trying to weave together the new proposed plan with the existing homes on the street. Now, I understand that those homes might change over time, but I also believe that there's a bunch of people who live in those Eichlers who love and appreciate the simplicity and the lines of the Eichler. So given that there's so many in this particular area, and the recommendation, so I appreciated the recommendation of the consulting architect, and would hope that if we approve this tonight for staff to resolve any outstanding issues with the applicant, that there would be some consideration of some consistency with that iconic Eichler roof line.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Jana. Any other comments or questions for staff, or would any commissioner like to make a motion? I will venture forth my comment. I made a comment a few minutes ago, but as far as the approvability of this project, I'm comfortable with granting the exceptions, and I'm also comfortable with staff's recommendation adding in condition 16. And so I feel that as long as the applicant does work with us and come in compliance with the residential design guidelines, that that I could get comfortable approving the application. Commissioner Clark.
I agree that I'm comfortable with granting the exceptions, especially I actually like that they kept it 0.6% over instead of completely changing their design, just because they had not been aware that they'd have to fit within those guidelines. And I think if the staff does feel comfortable and like it would work to work with the applicant after this to ensure that they meet the residential design guidelines, then I'm comfortable with that as well. And the one thing I'd want to say is I just ask that the applicant really, really talk to them with respect and be open to their ideas and suggestions. But I am overall comfortable approving this.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Vice Chair Barnett.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate in particular Mr. Paulson's comment about where we go if there's an impasse after the convocation between the owner and the staff. And I also approved the exceptions. I did note that 2/3 of the owners who signed the petition in favor of the project were from the immediate neighborhood. So I think that that counts somehow in the compromise that hopefully will be reached.
Good. Okay, so Commissioner Raspy.
I'm sorry, just to jump in. I too, like my fellow commissioners, are comfortable with the exceptions. I'd like to echo Commissioner Janoff's comment about the Eichlers. And so I think it's important to keep that flavor in the neighborhood. Maybe flavor is the wrong word, but I think we all get what we mean. And so long as staff is comfortable that we can get there using this approach, as opposed to making the applicant redo their plans and come back to full approval, I'm comfortable on this approach. If staff, however, is uncomfortable proceeding in that manner, then it would be fine with me if we require the applicant to come back after full compliance with design guidelines.
Could staff jump in and I think you've already commented in that direction, but to be more directly answer Commissioner Raspy's question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So staff is comfortable working with the applicant and the applicant's architect, and we'll see what progress we can make, and hopefully we can come to a positive conclusion. If not, there is a path to come back and revisit this with the Planning Commission.
Thank you, staff. Then I'm comfortable proceeding as proposed.
Well, then it sounds like it would be helpful if one of you would make a motion. Raise your hands at one time. Commissioner Jetta.
I was hoping to defer to some other commissioners. However, I'll attempt this motion, which will be more concise than Vice Chair Barnett. I move to approve the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence with an exception from parking requirements on an exemption for maximum lot coverage and site work requiring grading permit on non-conforming property pre-zoned R18, APN 523-22-010, architecture and site application S-21-020-15605 El Gato Lane, property owner Natasha Malisic. I can make the required findings for CEQA. I can make the required findings for the demolition of a single family residence. I can make the required compliance with the zoning requirements. I can make the required finding for an exemption to a single family parking requirement. I can make the required finding for lot coverage exception on a non-conforming lot. I can make the required compliance with the residential design guidelines, and all of these as further elaborated in Exhibit 2. Also the required conditions considerations in review of an architecture and site application, as well as the conditions of approval in Exhibit 3 and the designs as presented with the future change that staff will help the applicant achieve.
Very good. Do we have a second? Commissioner Clark.
I second.
Very good. Are there any comments that any commissioners would like to make before I call the question? All right, seeing none, I will call the question. By roll call, please vote yes, no, or abstain. Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Janoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Raspy.
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So it passes unanimously. And Director Paulson, are there any appeal rights for this action by the commission?
There are. Thank you, Chair Hansen. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available online and in the Clerk's Department. There is a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days, and the deadline on that 10th day is 4 p.m.
Very good. Thank you for that. So then we will move on to other business. However, we have no items under other business on the agenda, so we will move on to the report from the Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. So a couple quick things. One, just to let the Planning Commission know, the Town Council did extend the urgency ordinance for SB 9 with some modifications at their meeting last week. We've got a couple other Long-range planning meetings coming up. We will be meeting on the 17th with the Housing Element Advisory Board, where we'll be talking about the sites inventory analysis process, which is going to be a big component of the housing element effort. And then we're also going to be having a community meeting regarding objective standards on February 22nd. And that is going to be an opportunity for the public to provide input on the variety of topics, and for Commissioner Janoff and Commissioner Barnett, they know how extensive that list of topics is, but to make sure that we're not missing anything as we go forward and prepare an actual draft document with objective standards for mixed use projects and multifamily projects, which will then obviously come before the Planning Commission Council once we're ready for those actions. And that concludes.
Thank you for that. And just for the benefit of everyone on the commission, we had a subcommittee from the Planning Commission that spent many hours. It was former Commissioner Birch, as well as Vice Chair Barnett and myself, met for many hours over with the consultants to go through all the potential objective standards. And so this is the next logical step in that process, is to take the output of that and circulate it for public comment. So I hope you'll all have a chance to view that and see, follow that along, because it's an important thing that council had identified a couple of years ago. And so
thank you for that clarification, Chair. I have so many committees going on, I'm not sure who's on which one. Yes, Carrie Hansen.
Since I was one of the ones that had to sit in the many hours of meetings. Anyways, but I think it's going to be a very good thing for our town. And so then we will move on to subcommittee reports. In addition to their service on the Planning Commission, each planning commissioner serves in the additional capacity of committee member on another town committee, which in our case includes the General Plan Committee, and the General Plan Committee this year is taking the form primarily of the Housing Element Advisory Board. And then there's also the Historic Preservation Committee and the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee. Are there any committee reports from our last meeting that took place? Not seeing any. It sounds like for our next meeting, we will have one from the Housing Element Advisory Board, and but we don't have any for this meeting. So then I will go on to commission matters. And the final matter is commission matters, and this is a time for any commissioners to share any additional information or ask questions if needed. Are there any commissioners that wish to speak during commission matters? I'm not seeing any hands raised. So then, seeing none, I would like to thank all the commissioners and staff and the public for their participation in this meeting. Our next meeting, I don't know if we are having one, would be scheduled for February 23rd. Can staff confirm if we will be meeting on the 23rd?
We will be meeting on the 23rd.
Okay, very good. And so then with that, I will say this meeting is adjourned, and enjoy your evening and weekend.
Night.